Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame induction ceremony. I'm Tim Voss, the chair of the Hall of Fame committee. I hold the position by virtue of the fact that I am the chair or the director of the Michigan State School of Journalism. We are delighted and frankly a little bit nervous to be able to hold this event in person here at the Kellogg Center this evening. Of course, we're very pleased to be able to recognize outstanding journalists and remarkable journalism. We're going to begin this evening with presentation of the McCree Awards. Then dinner will be served, and around 7 or so, we'll proceed with the Hall of Fame induction. So, let me welcome James Tarrant, representing the Michigan Press Association Foundation, to talk about the McCree Award winners. Thank you.
The McCree Awards are named for Judge Wade McCree, one of the most distinguished lawyers and jurists of Michigan history, and a staunch advocate of equal rights, open, accountable government. McCree served as a circuit, federal, and U.S. appeals court judge, and from 1977 to 1981 as Solicitor General of the United States, arguing 25 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. The McCree Awards are based on significance and informative level of journalism, plus its impact on changing and improving the legal and law enforcement systems. They're awarded by the Michigan Press Association Foundation, which was created in 1980 and since 1990 has given over $330,000 in scholarships to young students of journalism here in Michigan. Perhaps there's an award winner in the room, who knows? We do, oh, I saw a hand go up. All right, 2. Oh, very good. And in addition to that, these awards are determined by a panel of 4 judges representing law and media, and they independently reviewed the 10 applications. I just thought I'd make note, since we have a lot of journalists here, perhaps someone here would like to be a judge someday. Look up online the Michigan Press Association, and you can find my email address there, and we'd be happy to have you help us. This year, the winners of the 45th Annual Wade McCree Awards are reporter Sarah Zwick of Michigan Radio for her investigative tax foreclosure lawsuit asks, how much can government take from property owners? This article shows how the citizens, especially those of at-risk foreclosures, don't even know how the process works. Unfortunately, Sarah is unable to be here with us this evening. Her daughter was exposed to COVID and they're in quarantine. Our second award winner was Chandra Bolzik of the Holland Sentinel for her columns Insider Takes on Prisons and Courts. She uses real-life experiences to show how prisons and the judicial system works. Unfortunately, she can't be with us because I heard an hour before before you arrived that her flight was canceled from wherever she was coming from. And someone here in the audience told me that there were, was it 1,000 or 2,000 flights today were canceled, so I understand that. And our third award went to reporter Nancy Kaffer of the Detroit Free Press for the in-depth investigation. She's tormented by Final Day's unexplained death of little sisters in Harper Woods Jail. And unfortunately, she's not with us because she had an unexpected family issue. But we want to bring the recognition to them here, and we're very pleased that we're able to award the McCree Awards during the Hall of Fame dinner. Thank you.
All right, enjoy your dinner, and again, around 7 o'clock or so, we'll have the induction ceremony. Before we begin our induction ceremony, allow me to say thank you to those who've helped make this evening possible. We'd like to say thank you to the Hall of Fame committee, who was very diligent in promoting the work of the Hall and in selecting this year's inductees. The names of the committee members are on page 2 of the program. Also, thank you to our sponsors. Special thanks to our gold sponsors, Hyundai and Toyota. The complete list of sponsors is also on page 2 of the program. Thanks to the Kellogg Center staff for helping make this evening go smoothly and for their help in planning this event. A very special thanks to the MSU School of Journalism faculty, staff, and students who did so much of the behind-the-scenes work for tonight's induction ceremony. Here I'd like to offer a special thank you to Betsy DeSantis, who, among her many talents, it turns out is a pretty first-rate event planner. So we literally could not have had this event without Betsy, but without so many other people here this evening. So thank you to all of those who made this possible. We are here this evening to recognize outstanding journalism, both with the McCree Awards earlier and now with the induction of 7 outstanding journalists into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. It's a pleasure to be in the company with so many here this evening who believe in the value that journalism contributes to society. Journalism at its best makes for a better world, whether that be in the Philippines or Russia, where Maria Ressa and Dmytro Muratov were honored with the Nobel Peace Prize just a couple of days ago, or whether that's here in the state of Michigan. Good journalism looks critically at matters of political governance, but it also is much more than that. It's also insightful reporting on crime, business, the auto industry, sports, and music. Things that are important to our overall well-being. Before we recognize this year's inductees, I'd also like to acknowledge the 2020 class of the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. We weren't able to honor them with an in-person event, so I'd like to mention them here and now, and if they or their families are here, please let us know when I call out their names. So the 2020 inductees were Tom Gage, Angelo B. Henderson, Arthur M. Horowitz, Mike Lloyd, Bill Proctor. Bill has some friends he wants you to meet, by the way, so stop and say hi to him. And the final inductee, Mark Stryker. We had a delightful virtual online event earlier this year to recognize these great journalists, but they also deserve to be acknowledged here tonight. So thank you for your amazing journalism. We'd also like to recognize those Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame members and committee members who have been lost since we last met. These amazing people were truly remarkable journalists and even better human beings. They are greatly missed. Now let's proceed with this year's induction.
Journalism was Al Allen's first love. In fact, he once referred to it as his childhood sweetheart, which is true. He got his start covering the news at his high school in Detroit. From there, he worked as a reporter and a manager at radio stations in Arkansas and Detroit before joining WJBK-TV in 1984. Considered the dean of the city's street reporters, Allen was one of the most recognizable faces in the city, working for the station for almost 30 years before retiring in 2012. Allen has won numerous awards for his work. He has been honored by the United Press International and the Associated Press, as well as the National Association of Black Journalists. He also won a Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award, been nominated for a National Emmy, and recognized by Wayne State University with the Working in a Spirit of Diversity Award. Allen is also an author, capping his career with a book about the stories from his life. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hall of Fame inductee Al Allen.
Thank you all so much. You're very kind. I'm looking at the people and the inductions who've been inducted in the past. And Dr. Proctor, we've worked with some of those people in the past as well. It is a thrill to be here. It is an honor to be inducted. I got phone calls in May and about a dozen or more, and I kept saying, well, what did I do? I retired 8 years ago. You don't get awards when you're retired, I thought. But then I'm hearing all the stories about what people say. My grandfather used to always say, always be on your best behavior because you never know what's watching. Now, some people I know did not care for me because I tried to be on my best behavior. I had to chase people down, Bill Proctor, you know about that, corner people, call them names, they call me names too. We've been threatened with guns, rifles, tear gas, you name it, water and so forth, but this was all part of our job. I tell my wife, we've been married 54 years, and she says, why do you watch the news now? You're retired. And I said, that news that you don't like bought you things. Don't forget it. But you all have been so kind, and I really appreciate this. I'll tell you a story, and Beth knows about it too as well. She was my news director at WCAR Radio. There was a story, you all remember Jimmy Hoffa, but there was a story a couple of years later by the guy by the name of Otto Wendell. Coincidentally, he was the secretary-treasurer of Teamsters Local 334. On his way to work, he had just gotten in his car and was going out his driveway, he was assassinated. Now, isn't it a coincidence that Jimmy Hoffa had disappeared and now the secretary-treasurer is assassinated too at the time? So they held in Michigan what they called an inquest. An inquest is a special group of people who come in and they dig a little bit deeper into exactly what happened and who may have been the bad person who did this. They had names like Charlie the Bologna with a butcher knife. I mean, these characters were something else. And it was in Howell and Pinckney. At the time, they told me, Al, you don't want to go to Howell and Pinckney. They don't like black folks up there. That's the home of the Ku Klux Klan. Well, I went anyway. And I met the prosecutor in the case, Martinez, I think that was his last name. We became good friends afterwards. But I had done all this, finished it up. The news director says, Al, why don't you do a documentary on that? I know you got all the tapes and all the interviews and stuff. Do a documentary. I did not want anybody to know I've never done a documentary before. And I didn't really know how to do a documentary. But I went in, wrote the story, pulled the sound bites, picked everything out, and lo and behold, I won at least 3 or 4 journalism awards for this documentary. So I kept saying to myself, well, I guess I must be doing the right thing. But you know, I know we only got a couple of minutes and so forth. And as we were talking before, I'm a radio broadcaster by trade. You learn what we call back timing. In the top of my head, I'm actually back timing. I know where I am time-wise right now. But I want to thank each and every one of you. I will continue to do my best. And you know, we have those who are not, don't really want to be journalists anymore. They don't want to miss their vacations. They don't want to miss other events in their lives. They don't want to get out there in the middle of a protest when there's tear gas, water, and everything thrown at you. That's all part of it. But we need more journalists to come up there, and we need to have more inductees in the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate this. And like I said, I didn't do anything. I retired 8 years ago.
Joanne Gerstner has news and sports in her blood. She grew up in Grosse Pointe, loving athletics, and with journalists in her family. Since getting degrees from Oakland University and Northwestern University, Gerstner has worked for numerous outlets, including the Detroit News, Flint Journal, Lansing State Journal, Cincinnati Enquirer, USA Today, ESPNW, and PGA Magazine. Gerstner and her work have also appeared in or on the New York Times and the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee's website, as well as CNN, the BBC, and NPR. She is also an expert on sports concussions, having literally wrote the book about it. Gerstner has been recognized by the Association for Women in Communications for her book, by MSU's College of Communication Arts and Sciences for her leadership, by Oakland University as a distinguished alumni, by the Association of Women in Sports Media, where she once served as president, and by the state of Michigan, where she served on the task force on women in sports. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hall of Fame inductee Joanne Gerstner.
Well, I'm not retired, so I can't beat what he just said. I've got a long way to go, hopefully. Thank you to the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame Committee for their consideration of me, to the Michigan State School of Journalism and many others. Betsy, thank you very much, and Barb for your hard work on tonight's ceremony. It definitely means a lot that we can gather together and celebrate. To my fellow 2021 honorees, I thank you for your legacies of incredible journalism. I am hopefully not done yet to be done with my career, and you serve as an inspiration for me to aspire to more. I want to send love back there to the Association for Women in Communications. Hi, guys. The Detroit chapter for nominating me, especially to Daniela and Pat Anstadt Kiska for doing the heavy lifting on the application, and to Maureen McDonald, there you are, for your advocacy of the Hall of Fame board. I'm humbled to have your support and grateful for your kindness and generosity, and I'm proud to represent AWC. I'm overwhelmed by the love of my family and my friends who came here to support me, especially my parents, Richard and Trudy, and my brother Paul. To my MSU colleagues, thank you for coming. And to my students, hello, I see you. Thanks for you guys coming to this too. If you have me for class tomorrow, this does not count as an excuse to skip. You know who you are. I'm from the generation of kids that was privileged to grow up watching the genius of Sesame Street. One of my favorite songs was, "One of these things is not like the other." A quick lesson on spotting differences in things. I have taken that song to heart, as for most of my career, I have been the other. Being a woman in sports media means you frequently may be one of the handful or the only female at a practice, game, or press conference. I know that when I covered the Pistons, the players, the trainers, the coaches, the front office, and the other media at the practice would all be male. And of course, likely 6'11" to my 5'5", but that's another story for another day. I frequently have been by myself, but I have never felt alone. I realized that thinking about that for tonight, and also when I was reading Billie Jean King's new autobiography called All In. It's a really good book, talking about her groundbreaking life. And in one section, she discusses the women that she dealt with in the media in the early days. And she counted on women in the media, which were not a few, to accurately tell her story, especially when it came to Bobby Riggs, things like that. I looked at the names of the women she listed, and I stopped. Nearly all of those women are my mentors and friends. They reached out to me when I was starting out in the business and offered their hearts and minds to me. I was surrounded by the biggest and baddest women who are literally paving the path into the sports media wilderness for all of us to follow. I had my metaphorical big sisters in the business coming ahead of me in the 1970s, the 1980s, and the 1990s, braving depthless sexual harassment. They sued for locker room access and fair treatment. They were brave, and they taught me how to be brave. And now I teach my Michigan State sports journalism students how to be brave. The reality of my standing here today is because I'm the product of many people's care and love. I'm here because I'm a survivor in a tough business that does not pay women equally or offer clear paths to significant promotions or management. The worlds that I have navigated and found success in, from print to multimedia to broadcast to research to academia, for the past 30 years are overwhelmingly male and overwhelmingly white. The sports side is male, but more diverse, which is why finding groups like AWC and my longstanding affiliation with the Association for Women in Sports Media are crucial. Like in sports, you cannot be successful on your own. I have had male sports editors who took risks in their careers to hire me. Dave Poniers of the Flint Journal, Jeff Rivers at the Lansing State Journal, Greg Noble at the Cincinnati Enquirer, and Phil LaSure at the Detroit News. I've worked for only 2 female bosses in my entire career, and one of them is here, Lucinda Davenport from the School of Journalism. The majority of my male colleagues treat me with respect and have looked out for me. The male colleagues who actively despised my presence as a woman in their sports department were roadblocks that were overcome. Hard work and perseverance are hardwired into my family. My mom immigrated from Germany as a young adult, not knowing a word of English. She made a life here, became a citizen, and wanted her German to be equally proud of being German and American. My dad, who is also the child of German immigrants, served our country in Vietnam and came home to be a caring and skilled dentist with his own practice for 4 decades. My parents always encouraged my brother and myself to follow our dreams. I wanted to be a sports writer in elementary school. The rest is history. I've been around the world to cover the biggest events and athletes. I have gotten a front row to see things from the Olympic torch being lit to the Stanley Cup coming to my hometown, to watching athletes named LeBron, Miggy, Federer, Rashid, Stevie Y, Usain, Draymond, Serena, Nadal, Tiger, and Mia in their prime. I've been given the privilege to move people with my words, and that is the deepest honor I'll ever receive. I have not been shy to take chances. My continual reinvention is much of my own choosing, but also born of the turmoil of a fragmenting media industry. I have taken leaps of faith and been rewarded. I left my dream job at the Detroit News after 10 years to branch out into my own media business and law school. I found I hated law school with every fiber of my being, left, and then went to ESPN to help launch ESPNW. I chose to take a year out of my career and leave ESPN to study sports neurology at the University of Michigan on fellowship. That helped me branch out into sports and science, which led to a book for parents and coaches about sports concussion. I chose to take my talents to Michigan State to help build our sports journalism program. I now am in a small group of global journalists and content creators that are working with Facebook. I have my own platform called Open Court, which gives me a space to write about sports, science, and life. I am the only female sports writer on the platform right now, and I hope the Bulletin Project will lead to more opportunities for journalists globally. And that brings me finally to the inescapable place that I hope will vanish in my lifetime. I just want to be a sports writer, not a female sports writer. I wish my gender was not linked with my job, but it is. Given the recent statistics that show women that are less than 12% of the sports media business, we have a long way to go. We have had more women go into space as astronauts than we have women that are sports editors and columnists in this country right now. We are still fighting for equality and equity. My advocacy for women in sports media is unwavering. We need each other to succeed. We are punching holes in the glass ceiling one by one, but it is not as fast as we hoped, which is why we need to keep going. And I will. I want to see more women in sports media inducted into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. This honor means a lot to me now, and I'm sure it'll mean even more as I keep going. Thank you very much.
Jean Jennings may have learned to love cars from her father, the editor of the Automotive News. But she learned about cars all by herself. She started as the owner and operator of a yellow cab and quickly learned to fix it up. Then she drove and repaired cars at the Chrysler Proving Grounds. Not content to just be behind the wheel or under the hood, she started writing the UAW newsletter and turned that into a job at Car and Driver magazine. A few years later, her career shifted into overdrive, serving as the executive editor, then editor-in-chief, then the president of Automobile Magazine. She became the first woman to lead a major monthly car magazine. Jennings spent almost 30 years there, leading the team that became the first automotive publication to win a National Magazine Award. She has won dozens of awards for her work and been honored by groups including the Detroit Press Club Foundation, the Motor Press Guild, and International Society for Vehicle Preservation. She has also shared her knowledge and her sense of humor with The Tonight Show and Good Morning America. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Hall of Fame inductee Jean Jennings.
The first thing I want to do is thank my husband, who's right here. And he's sitting at a table with Kathleen Hamilton, who has worked for Automobile Magazine. She's worked for Automotive News. Laura Sky Brown, who was our copy editor at Car and Driver and at Automobile Magazine. And do you think I need a microphone? Really? Wow. Okay. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. Maybe we have to turn that on. I have to lean forward. So I'd like to thank my husband, first of all, and Kathy Hamilton and Laura Sky Brown, who put this whole thing together for me, for my induction, which was shocking. I tried to talk them out of it, and I said I was way too busy. But now that I'm standing here, I have just some little notes, some few little notes, but I speak real fast. Honey, I'm so sorry I'm going to do this right now in front of you, too. Okay, so this is just a little capsule version of my life. I was fired from Automobile Magazine on May 28th, 2015. It was the third time in a lifetime of careers that I thought I was dead. The first being when I was a cab driver and picked up a guy who just escaped from the mental hospital in Ypsilanti and murdered his wife. My spidey sense told me that this was a very bad guy sitting directly behind my head, flicking a Zippo lighter over and over as I drove. I talked without stopping until he finally got out of my cab and walked away. My second career, smashing cars into the wall at the Chrysler Proving Grounds, came at an abrupt halt. It came to an abrupt halt when Chrysler, teetering on one of its several brinks of disaster, laid me off. What I did was create a newsletter for the union there. It won some international awards. And actually, at that point, David E. Davis Jr. hired me at Car and Driver magazine from my little newsletter, a mimeograph newsletter for the union. And so what he did, he's the one who made me, let me just say that, the stories that I had are my stock in trade. They landed me that job at Car and Driver magazine. I wasn't much of a journalist. I never thought of myself as a journalist. I like to tell stories. So my whole career has been about telling stories. David E. Davis made me dress better. He made me write better. And he made me speak in complete sentences. But after that, he then took me with him to start Automobile Magazine. It was an amazing thing for him to do. I was not an engineer or a car designer. I wasn't even a trained journalist. I did not eventually become the president of Automobile Magazine because of my scintillating car reviews, because they weren't, and I avoided them all like the plague, and would leave the country whenever David E. was mad at me, and I would go do an adventure somewhere, you know, in Italy or anywhere I could go except there. So I have to say that my adventures, included winning the Chelsea Fair Demolition Derby, riding motorcycles in China with Malcolm Smith, who was a stunt rider, crossing the Alps with Sterling Moss, who was one of the most famous drivers of his time, And Malcolm Smith, who was the stunt rider, Pikes Peak champion Tajima in a rally car, the Baja 1000 with a Russian circle track driver who, whenever he wanted to let me know there was danger in the road during the Baja, he would just smack me in my helmet. But I got to write the big story, so I got him back. So that, that is the good thing about being a journalist, isn't it? You can write the story. You can write the story when it's over. So just from there, the only thing I really had going for me were those stories. That's what kept me going. People would say, you know a lot about cars, and I'd say, not really. I know a lot about what to do with them, and I know how to tell you the stories about those cars and all the things that we do. But so that was it. I had my stories, and here I am, 36 years later, with a bad neck, enough material for a couple of books once a few more people die, and your acknowledgement, which means more than you will ever know. I've had the best life ever, and I'm not dead yet, so I just want to thank you all for this. I can't really believe this is happening to me. I really don't. It's not anything I planned. Kathleen, I'll get you back. Laura, you'll
After graduating from Wayne State University, Edward Lapham started his career at Ward's Communications, where he covered the auto industry and rose through the ranks as an associate editor and managing editor. Then he joined Automotive News, and over the course of 36 years, Lapham served as financial editor, senior editor, managing editor, executive editor, and editor. Among many other adventures, he chronicled the rise and fall of John DeLorean better than anyone else, and won numerous awards for his work from the Detroit Press Club, the New York Business Press Editors, and Wayne State University. He has also written for the Business Week, the Detroit Free Press, Times of London, and Reuters, and spent almost a decade as a broadcaster doing weekly auto reports on WJR. But his accomplishments extend beyond his stories. Lapham served as president of the Detroit Press Club and its foundation. He helped found the Automotive Press Association and has judged the North American Car, Utility, and Truck of the Year Awards. He has also helped grow the next generation of great reporters by teaching investigative reporting at his alma mater. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Edward Lapham.
And then when I was in the third grade, it's a treat to be here with all of you. Family, friends, colleagues, associates. Heck, these days it's a treat to be anywhere. The times I've been here before when other people were honored, I never figured it would happen to me, but now it has. And I'm very grateful for the honor, I really am. But I want to take just a minute, because more than that, I want to commend the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame and everyone involved for having the sense of purpose and the process to keep this community together in the face of everything that's happened since the last time we were here. That matters. As we all know, while societies change, media change, technology changes, and people change, what doesn't change or what shouldn't change is how the news business works. It's simple. We report. That is, we gather news, information, and data. We edit. We arrange it so that it's palatable, digestible, and hopefully nutritious. And then we serve it to our readers, viewers, and listeners. It's that simple, and it should work that way. And it's important for this community to keep focused on those points and to make that happen. And I thank the Hall of Fame and its supporters so very much. Okay, so much for the sermon. When I was 11 or 12, my grandfather asked me what I want to be. I said, I want to be a lawyer. Grandpa was a German immigrant, a carpenter who'd worked with his hands his whole life, who didn't trust lawyers because he said they'd lied to him. So he wasn't impressed I wanted to be a lawyer. But I didn't care. I wanted to be like Perry Mason. I wanted to defend the innocent. I wanted to find out what really happened and to get the real criminals on the record. It was a happy day when I realized you don't need to go to law school to do those things. Now, I was an inquisitive kid. Oh, heck, I was a nosy brat. And my parents always had to admonish me with things like, Ed, remember, curiosity killed the cat. And if you can't find something nice to say about someone, don't say anything at all. Or, son, keep your nose in your own pocket. And if I was really persistent, Dad would say, what are you, a cop or writing a book? I never had a good answer for that. When I was a young freelancer just out of college, I was blessed to be able to get a Detroit police and fire line press pass, which were hard to come by. A friend I'd known since high school said, well, Ed, you finally got your gawker's permit. But I never needed it. I didn't use it because not long after that, I got my first real full-time reporting job at Ward's Communications. I was an associate editor of Ward's Automotive Reports. At Ward's, with much guidance, I evolved from a somewhat nosy freelancer to a business reporter. 4 years later, I went to work at Crane Communications and Automotive News. The Crane Communications was a great place to work, to practice my craft, to build my career. I had outstanding colleagues. I had many opportunities to do different things and different kinds of things, which was fun and kept the thing going. I was fortunate to have worked in two very strong ethical editorial operations with editors who were intelligent, who were informed, who were experienced, and taught, mentored, and occasionally admonished me. But they also enabled me, which was the key thing. For 40 years, I primarily covered the auto industry, and it was a great gig. I met more interesting people, went more places, did more things, and drove more exciting cars and trucks than I ever imagined possible. Sometimes, now, late at night, when I'm being reflective, I wonder, I feel guilty for having had that much fun and getting paid for it? Nah. Bottom line is, despite all the changes and everything that's gone on in the business since I started as a reporter back when Richard Nixon was president, I'd probably do it all over again, but I might take a little different path. You see, things are different, but they're still the same in many ways. Look, I've long since outgrown being just nosy. But I have to admit that what some people consider a character flaw has been useful and helped make my career a terrific trip. Thank you very much.
When she was a kid, Marjorie Sorge was a huge fan of journalists Clark Kent and Lois Lane. Little did she know that she'd turn out to be an auto industry and journalistic superwoman. Her story started right here at Michigan State University, where she got her degree in journalism. Then it took her to Motown, where she wrote about the auto industry and labor issues for several outlets, including the Detroit News and Automotive News. It's at the Automotive News where she became the feature editor, then the labor editor. Then at Ward's Auto World, she became the managing editor, and then the executive editor. Finally, at Automotive Industries, Sorge was named editor-in-chief. At every stop along the way, she broke big stories, and over the course of her career, she picked up major awards. But she didn't limit her career to print. Sorge also did weekly broadcasts about the industry on WJR and also created and launched the Detroit Regional News Hub, where journalists writing about the area could find the information they needed to help tell their stories. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hall of Fame inductee Marjorie Sorge.
Didn't know I was a superwoman, so that's kind of interesting. It's really hard to believe I'm standing here with all these amazing people on the stage. Congratulations to all of you. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm very proud to do so. We have followed in the footsteps of some giants in the industry, many of whom we can call our mentors. One thing I learned in my career is that mentors make all the difference in the world. I've been fortunate to have many of them, starting with Mary Gardner, who was my professor at Michigan State. Those of you who have had her know that she was a scary lady. Retired Marine colonel, red marks all over your paper. It was quite bad, and it really bruised your ego. But all that time, she taught you to be much more critical of your own work and do a better job. She demanded accuracy, honesty, and hard work that would make mission reporting skills turn into successful careers for many of us undergrads. She was my advisor. One piece of advice she gave me was always have a go-to-hell fund, which is very good advice. Jean's dad, Bob Leinert, was my editor at Automotive News. When Bob called me again for an interview, he asked me why I came to Automotive News. Why in the world did I try to come there? And I said, Bob, I've been carrying around a phone book, looking for a job in someplace in Detroit, and Automotive News started with an A. Not my best answer. Luckily, I had some clips with me. He hired me and started me out doing weekly production figures. Now, this is a boring job. It involves calling PR every week, getting all the figures of the vehicles that they make, and writing a story about it, long columns. But at that time, there was no Excel. I did it with a computer and a spreadsheet. Thought it was really boring, but I quickly realized it was the best job for a young reporter. Started me out at the very beginning, taught me the industry from the ground up, and by that point, all the PR people knew who I was, so it was a great thing. Dave Smith, who's sitting right over there, was my boss at Ward's Auto World, and I couldn't have asked for a better mentor. Other than the fact that he went to the University of Michigan, that's a bit of a problem. You know, we bet every year. Yeah, I know. We bet every year on the Michigan State game, and I think I won more times than you did. Dave was nitpicky. Details mattered. He taught us to look around the office. For example, when you go to do an interview, look around the office, see what's hanging on the walls, see what's on the desk, see what you can see that gives you a better idea for that story and a better idea about the person you're interviewing. He reminded us all that being first on a story is great, but there's always something more. He wanted the whole story and made us dig deeper and deeper and deeper. He wanted us to be critical thinkers and never accept anything at face value. He challenged me every day. That not only made me a better reporter, it made me a better human being. Those are just 3 of the mentors that I've had, and I've had many of them, and I thank them all for their guidance and a lot for their patience with me. They all agreed on several things. Journalists have the responsibility to cover all sides of a story, and your opinion doesn't matter in the story, should never, ever be there, which has changed a bit these days. Don't prejudge. You never know where the story will go when you start reporting it. A deadline is a deadline. Do not miss it. Except that you'll screw up. Sometimes it turns out to be for the best. And if you're really lucky, it can. When General Motors bought EDS in 1984, GM was my beat. It was a Thursday afternoon, early, when Bob Leinert came over to my desk and said, get an interview with Ross Perot, EDS founder, for Monday's paper. Now, at that time, Automotive News basically went to bed on Thursday night. So not a lot of time here. So when Bob left, I laughed, told the other reporters in the room, there's no way Perot's going to call me back in time to do a story by the end of the day. I called Perot's office. His assistant told me, he's not available. I'll have him call you back. Sure, I told the other reporters in the room. About a half an hour later, the phone rings. Hi there, this is Ross Perot. I figured someone in the newsroom was making a joke with me. And I said, so, right, prove it. He's going, this is Ross Perot. I'm going, prove it. Well, after some time, I realized that, and many prove it, so I realized I really was talking to Ross Perot. So I apologized over and over and over again. And he said, I said, I'm so used to somebody calling me back and saying, please hold for so-and-so, or a PR person calling me back, asking me what in the world I wanted with this guy. And he looked at me and he said on the phone, he said, that's what's wrong with the auto industry. He proceeded to give me a great interview. I made my deadline, and Ross never forgot me. From that day on, he always took my calls. When I was a little girl, as was mentioned, I loved Superman comics. I did wish I could fly like he could, but I was always a fan of Lois Lane. She was determined, courageous, truthful, and committed to getting to the crux of the story no matter what. She also made it in a man's world. In many ways, she was a mentor. My mom and my dad always told me to do what makes you happy. I'm glad I did. It's been a great ride. And along that ride, I did find my own Clark Kent, who sometimes as Superman for our boys and for me as well. And by the way, Dave, go green.
It's not often you get a shout-out from the Queen of Soul, but as it turns out, the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame isn't the only one to recognize the talents of Susan Whitall. Aretha Franklin once called out to her at a concert in Clarkston. And it's not just Aretha. Frank Sinatra once wrote to thank her for a concert review. It's more high praise for a woman who spent more than 40 years covering music and news. Whitall had a front row seat to the music world after becoming one of the first women to lead a national music magazine. She became editor-in-chief of Cream magazine in the late 1970s. After almost 8 years there, she joined the Detroit News, where she'd spent more than 30 years, where she wrote everything from hard news to a gossip column. But it's always been about the music, as Whitall led the paper's award-winning coverage of Aretha Franklin's death. And her writing wasn't confined to the newspaper. She has also written several books, including one about the women of Motown and another about Joni Mitchell. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hall of Fame inductee Susan Whitall.
Thank you. I wanted to say something about we were talking at my table earlier about the trauma of music reviewing that I had to go through often. My brother was reminding me about those trash 80s, because he would go to concerts with me sometimes, and we'd see a wonderful Rolling Stone show or something, and we'd be happy, and then the trauma would start for me, because it would be like, yeah, I've got this little trash 80 from Radio Shack. There would be 3 lines you could see as you're typing. You'd have to bang this thing out. And then the trauma of wondering whether it's going to send or not, and half the time it did not. It was years before Mike O'Hara told me there was actually a direct line from the press box at the Silverdome to the news. I was like, what can you tell me this? Instead, I was in, the phone jack, whatever. But yeah, I was at Cream Magazine. I was just out of school, Michigan State, English major. I was struggling to write a piece. I was whining about writer's block when the famous Lester Bangs, my mentor and editor, said, "There's no such thing as writer's block. Just start typing." That's been my North Star ever since, because I had been kind of, typical English major, reading poetry, writing poetry, walking through the Beale Gardens, thinking about Walt Whitman. And I needed that seasoning of grit and rage and just get the story done. I needed that balance, and I got it. Over the years, I've had the privilege of writing for magazines, newspapers, and my own nonfiction books, including my book, my Little Willie John book, which I was really proud of. That was a Michigan Notable book in 2011. And but it's kind of started here at State. I would be over at the grad stacks at the MSU library reading all old New York magazines, Nora Ephron and Tom Wolfe, and thinking, am I ever going to live someplace like New York in the 60s, some creative enclave like that? I did find my special place, but I never realized, I didn't think it would be Birmingham, Michigan. I'd be writing about the Rolling Stones, Grand Funk Railroad, But it worked out that way. It was one of the most creative experiences that anyone could hope for. and Aretha, and I have to say too, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but Governor Milliken, William Milliken, helped me get my job at Cream. He might have regretted it, but he did. The fact that I would be in Paul McCartney's dressing room, and this crowd might like this, watching him do an impression of Bill Bonds. It was after his show at Olympia, after the Wings show. The 11 o'clock news was on. He had a portable TV in the dressing room. And McCartney just picked up on Bonds having this very, very distinctive delivery, and he just started imitating him. So to this day, the thought of Bill Bonds is filtered through Paul McCartney's face, voice. It's a nightmare, kind of. I was in Mick Jagger's dressing room, and he was half dressed, and I thought I was just saying hello, and he's talking to me, and he's like, well, aren't you going to write this down? I'm like, oh, is this an interview? Okay. Luckily, I had, right. Go back to the phone, call Detroit. I have an interview. I don't know how it happened, whatever. Got a thank you note from Sinatra. He usually did not like female journalists. It wasn't an entirely positive review. I did chide him a bit for having to, the first 3 songs, his voice wasn't warmed up, and he could have done that backstage, whatever. But I did quote him as saying, Detroit's a great music town. So he reiterated that in the note. It was great. Although typical newsroom, when the letter came, everyone, we held it up against the windows, and my fellow reporters were like, that's a fake. That's not really him. Now we've got the internet, you can look up what his signature is, what his stationery was. Yeah, it's real. If I don't mention this, Patty will heckle me. I did dance with George Harrison of the Beatles one time, yeah. Press parties, Chicago. I was one of the few women music writers at the time when I was at Cream, and there was there's a Beatle there. He's announcing his new record label, Dark Horse. There's no other women in the room except a couple secretaries. He's dancing with what women there are. My friend Patrick, the writer, said, you've got to get up there. You're going to regret this the rest of your life. So there I was. About Governor Milliken and how he got me my job at Cream. My publisher, Barry Kramer, found a state of Michigan program that would pay half your salary for 6 months if it was somebody out of work. This was like 1975. Of course, I was looking for a job when there was a depression. That's always the way. And I got to thank him for it, Governor Milliken, in this room when my friend Norm was inducted to the Hall of Fame. He was here, I think, for Tim Skubic, and thank Governor Milliken, you did it. Was this a wise use of public funds? Think of it this way, all these years later, Cream is seen as a real cultural gem that came out of Michigan, and it's not only nationally but internationally known as a much more creative and fun place than Rolling Stone was, and it just never ends. Now, being a woman in the world of 70s music journalism was a challenge. My publisher at Cream, Barry Kramer, once said I was too young and too female to be head editor. I think he did it to provoke me into proving him wrong, and it worked. But, let's not make our young women work that hard. We don't really have to. And after Barry died, things started to get a little loose at Cream, and I applied for a job at both Detroit papers. My friends at the papers had always said, come on in real journalism, you gotta do this. Well, I thought the Free Press, that bastion of free love, swinging feature sections, but they thought my Cream clips were a little out there. The old gray lady, the Detroit News, said, come on down. And by the way, don't change. So I do owe a debt of gratitude. I only knew this in the last 10 years maybe, that the women at the Detroit News, led by Mary Lou Butcher, did have a class action suit to get more women hired, and that benefited a lot of us in my age group. We were young, we were female, come on. And I got to thank Mary Lou, too, who's also in the Hall of Fame. It was a wonderful thing they did. And Jim Vesley hired me, Lyle Linder wrote me encouraging notes. I was doing crazy stories like Susan Weiland used to, I had a Karl Lagerfeld hat in the form of a chair that I had to wear to a party and see what people said. They had me doing some stunt journalism like that in the early 80s. It was a brief, wild period where the papers were really going at each other, and it was kind of fun. Scooping each other, spying on each other, and we never ate lunch at our desk. It was not that dreary. We were always out and about. One of my MSU English department heroes, Richard Ford, once said, when people realize they're being listened to, they tell you things. And I think I always listened. I tried to. I think that's what Aretha appreciated. That, and she could talk to me about Dinah Washington or Baby Washington, and I knew who she was talking about. She didn't have to explain. I want to thank my editors out there, Nancy Hannes, Felicia Henderson. Felicia and I were almost more collaborators when it came to Aretha than editor and journalist. And we had a big Aretha scoop when Aretha had her real serious illness that Aretha did not want us to know about. It took her a while to forgive me for that story, but Aretha finally did. And I want to thank the board for the recognition. Maureen McDonald, Women in Communications, thank you. My friend Steve Shepard helped me, and my parents taking me to the library when I could barely walk, letting me go see the Beatles when I was 12. And I want to quote my other hero, Jim Harrison, from the English department here, who said, death takes everything but our stories. So keep telling them, and I will too. Thank you.
Tom Henderson has more than 50 local and national journalism awards to his name. Not bad for a guy who started as a copy boy at the Detroit Free Press with no formal training in journalism. Instead, the MSU political science major worked his way into reporting, where he literally pursued his passions. In a 20-year career with Runner's World magazine, he ran and wrote about running from the Andes Mountains to Angkor Wat. Henderson has also covered everything from the Detroit Red Wings to crime, writing 5 true crime books. He has worked for the Detroit News and the Free Press, and his work has appeared in more than half a dozen magazines. Most recently, he has focused his career on business journalism, covering everything from entrepreneurship to venture capitalism for Crane's Detroit Business. More than an author and a reporter, Henderson is also a teacher and a mentor. He has taught reporting classes at Oakland and Wayne State Universities, helping create the next generation of great journalists. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hall of Fame inductee Tom Henderson.
Well, going last takes the pressure off. I don't have to try to top anybody. In January of 1971, I was early into my second semester in the Masters of Journalism program at Michigan State University. And Dr. George Huff, who was teaching one of my classes and also my advisor, asked me to come to a meeting in his office one day. And I came in, and he was pretty to the point. He said, "Tom, I'd like you to do you, me, Michigan State University, in the world of journalism, and drop out of school." And I'm not here to say I had the last laugh on him. He was entirely right. And if he wouldn't have told me that, and if I wouldn't have dropped out of school that day, I wouldn't be here. 3 days later, my dad was up in his old Volkswagen VW, and my first wife and I had our meager belongings were getting packed into his car, his VW, and off we went back to Detroit. A buddy of mine, his dad, or his older brother, was a manager at the Uniroyal plant on Jefferson in Detroit, got me a job driving a high-low. Now, I'd had a number of factory jobs through college, and that seemed like about the best job you'd ever get, except I was a college graduate and didn't really want to work in a factory forever. Why was I so unprepared for graduate school that I had to soon become a high-low driver? And the fact was, I think I was ruined by being addicted to the TV show Peter Pan and to the movie Peter Pan, because I never saw any point to growing up. I didn't understand why anybody would come back to from Never Never Land. And I took classes in school that turned out to be beneficial for a career. I took things that interested me with no thought of a career or a major. I didn't take any classes on Friday afternoon because I might want to get out for a long weekend. I didn't take any classes on Monday morning because I might want to come back late from a long weekend. I took calculus, advanced calculus, physics, geology, the Romantic poets, Shakespeare. I took a bunch of political science courses because it was the Vietnam era. I took short story writing. Just whatever looked cool that semester in the handbook, I took it. And in April or May of 1970, I was getting married in June. My wife had one more year of school ahead of her, and I thought, I ought to start thinking about what my major is going to be. I was a last semester senior at the time, and I assumed I would have to go to school for one more year. So I had a bunch of English classes, and I looked in the handbook, and counterintuitively, you had to have 2 years of a foreign language to be an English major, and I wasn't going to take another year of French. I'd had some math classes, but not nearly enough. I looked up political science, and it turned out I had all the requisites. I was a political science major. Oh my goodness, I'm going to graduate on time. So I went in the next day to the political science department and went to an advisor, and I said I want to declare a major. She said, are you a first or second year student? And I said, I'm a last semester senior. She said, that's not how it's supposed to work. Well, no, it's not. I wasn't going to go to law school. I wasn't going to go to graduate school, so I was completely ill-prepared for any job with a political science major. So the next thing to do was to look in the handbook and see what was the easiest master's program to get into. And it looked to be journalism, so I applied and they let me in. My first class I had, they wouldn't give you credit for 100 or 200 level classes. You had to take 400 level or graduate courses. And I wasn't going to pay for a class I wouldn't get credit. So I didn't take any, elementary, early news writing, whatever. I took advanced news writing. And our first day of class, the teachers asked us to write our own obituary. And I wrote her this stream of conscious, James Joycean epic. And I was so proud of myself. And I came in the next day, and she passed the paper, next class, and she passed the papers around. She said, can I speak to you after class? And this was a premonition of what was going to happen with George Huff the next semester. And she said, you are totally ill-prepared for this class. You can't possibly pass it. You should drop it while you can still get your money back. And I did. And I passed whatever. I took a law of the press, and I passed that. And there was some history of journalism that had a book on all the old comic book characters from the 1890s, and that was fun. And then the second semester, I had a class with Huff, and he saw right through me. I was depressed, completely of my own making. Now what do? I drive a high-low at Unirail. I'm there 2.5 months, and everybody there, they know I'm a college graduate, and I loved the job. It was a lot of fun. I was making $300 a week, which was a lot of money then. But I didn't want to work in a factory the rest of my life, and everyone I worked with said, if you stay here 1 year, you'll be here the rest of your life. So I called in sick one Friday, and I put on a sport coat and tie, and I went downtown Detroit, and I went to every place I could think of to apply for a white-collar job. I didn't care what it was, something that would give me employment, and I wouldn't have to be in a factory. I applied at banks. I applied at insurance agencies. I applied at Michigan Bell. About 3 in the afternoon, I saw the Free Press building, and I said, that'll be my last stop of the day. And I went in. There was a guard in the lobby. I said, I'm here to apply for a job. He said, well, business side, editorial. Well, go up to the 3rd floor. I get to the 3rd floor. The elevator opens, and this Pat Leverington, who was the admin, was sitting there right in her desk right across from the elevator. She said, can I help you? I said, I'm here to apply for a job. And she said, what newspapers have you worked at? I said, journalism school did you go to? I couldn't tell her I got kicked out, so I said I didn't. She just started laughing, and she said, see that old guy down there? And I looked, and there's an old guy down there. She goes, go see him. He might have a job you're qualified for. And I said, what job would that be? And she says, copy boy. I said, what does a copy boy do? She says, sharpen pencils and fill glue pots. I went down. Fred Spring was indeed an old guy. He said, oh, I'll let you fill out an application. I filled out the application. He opens up a drawer, and he pulls out a stack like this high. And he said, just to let you know, here are the other applications I have on file. So he says, don't hold your breath, but I'll be glad to keep it. Okay. Funeral oil it is, you know. I get in the car, I drive home. Not surprised at what's happened. It's sort of like expected, but I get home. I walk in the door. My wife is home from school. She had transferred to Wayne State. She says, some guy named Fred Spring called. He said to call him back. I call him back. He said, 2 minutes after you left, a guy quit it without giving me any notice. You want a job? Get in here Monday. I go in Monday. They have me take a personality test, and it turned out I had a personality. And they had me take an IQ test, and it was high enough that I apparently passed that as well. And I said, Fred, I said, the last thing you said to me was, you showed me that file and said, hold your breath. He said, you know how long it's been since I've seen a young man in a sport coat. This was the anti-Vietnam era. Everybody, you know, and that was the first time I'd had a sport coat and tie on in a long time. And he said, and I'm retiring at the end of this week, and I thought it would be nice to start another young man off on his career. And I have thought of that guy so many times. I'm going to get emotional. Fred, you don't know what the hell you did. Walking into that newsroom my first day of actual work the next day, where I was told how to sharpen pencils, how to do glue pots, and glue pots are not easy. You have to have the right mix of glue and paint thinner. Got to be just the right texture. Put the mail, all the mail into different mailboxes. Take the New York Times and Wall Street Journal around to various editors. Well, that first day was like in the Wizard of Oz when it goes Technicolor. That world came alive. There was the wire service machines going crazy. Reporters at their typewriters, pneumatic tubes, copy whooshing up, people yelling copy. And it was like the most stunning thing I'd ever seen, and I knew that I would never want to be part of anything else. And it was the magic place of magic people doing magic stuff. I got on your guys' Hall of Fame website. And here were the people I worked with in the first couple of years of the 1970s. Frank Angelo, Judd Arnett, Jane Briggs Bunting, Peter Brown, who, by the way, was a catcher on my softball team. I managed the Free Press softball team for many, many years. He was at the City County Bureau. And one day in the bar after a game, he said, Hendel, don't tell anybody, but I'm quitting the Free Press. I said, what for? He says, I'm taking a job at this new publication, Crane's Literary Business. We're going to be a weekly. We're not going to cover the auto industry. Want to keep that day job. So Peter Brown, Betty DeRamus, Joe Falls, Hugh Granum, Kim Aaron, Jack Kresnak, Dick Mayer, Mick McCabe, Hugh McDermott, Jim Newbacher, Hal Schramm, Mary Schrader, Bill Sarin, Neil Shine, Tony Spina, Barb Stanton, Joe Stroud, Joe Swicker, Bob Telbert, Susan Watson, and now me. That was all at the same paper at the same time. My copy boy staff that I joined included Tim Kiska, the great Tim Kiska, John Castine, who went on to a long career in the newspaper business and then the magazine business, Jack Kresnak, Hall of Famer, John Smintak, longtime Free Press guy, Zachary Ball, she came out a couple years later, became a legend in the obituary writing business. An incredible staff of kids making $90 a week, just hoping they could, by osmosis, get good, and they did. So there I was. I'm already, and the whole point of this is to tell you I'm nowhere near the best writer here in the Hall of Fame, by far. I'm nowhere near the best reporter. I am hands down the luckiest, and I can prove it. Fred Spring's call is number one. How did I become a hockey writer? I played hockey, which isn't, you should do more than just be able to play hockey. I spent a year as a copy boy. I spent a year as the office manager and head copy boy. I went to Action Line for a year. At the end of that year, Neil Shine, who was a wonderful guy and loved me, and I loved him, called me down one Friday afternoon, and he said, Tom, you're starting on the copy desk Monday. I've never edited a piece of copy in my life. He says, those guys out there think it's rocket science, but it's not. And he handed me a book. He says, read this over the weekend. It was Solid Gold Copy Editor. And it was a textbook on how to edit copy. I started editing copy Monday. Not one of my headlines made it into the paper for 2 months. But they seemed to think I was all right editing copy. And one day I asked Neil, am I failing or did I pass? He said, oh, Hendo, you passed your first day, you're fine. They just don't like to let rookies get their headlines in the paper too quick. Transferred me to sports. I was a copy editor in sports for a couple years. Toward the end of the 1976 hockey season, 75-76, the hockey beat guy quit on no notice about a month ago in the season. I was playing hockey 2 days a week, so George Puskas, the executive editor, said, hey, Hendo, you got to fill in on the beat for the rest of the season. Fine, I did that. At the end of the season, he said, you did good, but we're not hiring you. We're going to get a veteran beat guy. The job deserves a veteran beat guy. You're going back to the copy desk. Okay. End of August, early September kind of time frame, George comes up and he says, when did the Red Wing training camp start? I said, 2 or 3 days. He said, oh, shit, I forgot to hire somebody. He says, you want the beat? Suddenly I'm a hockey reporter. So that's how I became a hockey reporter. How did I become a business reporter? Well, there's a simple answer to that, and it's softball. I was playing softball 6 leagues a week throughout the late 70s, early 80s. In those days, if it wasn't your beat season, you worked in the office, you just hung around, you rewrote wire service, you answered the phone, you played Liar's Poker, and you took very long liquid lunches at the Lindale AC or the Anchor Bar. And this kind of little-known pizza guy named Mike Ilitch in 1977 joined a professional softball league. And he got the best softball players in Detroit and recruited some players from around the country, and they had the best team in the country. And I loved the idea of not being in the office rewriting wire service stuff and actually just being out watching softball. So he hired Jim Northrup and Norm Cash, who were former Tigers, to try to drum up publicity for his team, and nobody cared. Radio, TV, the Detroit News, nobody gave a rat's butt about covering a softball league, except me. So I would go out to all the games. I'd come back to the office. I'd write it up. And he was thrilled. I got to be friends with him. He was just so happy somebody was paying attention. The league lasted 3 years. It ended in 1979, the same year my hockey career ended. I was going through a divorce. It was entirely of my own doing. Stressed out from covering the University of Michigan football and the Red Wings at the same time. Couldn't do anything about the divorce, so I just quit work. And decided to replace the stress of work with the stress of doing cocaine day and night, buying it and selling it relentlessly for 2 years. At the end of that 2 years, I thought, this thing about stress hasn't worked out the way I planned. I need to, and everybody knew I was doing it. I was selling to half the staff at the Free Press and buying from half the people at the news. So this was not a secret. I thought, what's the one thing you can do to prove to people you're not a cocaine junkie anymore? I know, I'll run a marathon. So I told everyone I was going to run a marathon, and I trained for it. And I had no intention of ever becoming a runner. I was going to run one marathon and be done with it and prove to people I'm not doing drugs. Can I please get work? Tom Ferguson, a legendary Free Press editor, was editing a special section the Free Press ran on the Friday before its fall marathon every year. He asked if I would do a couple of stories. I said, sure. One of them was a profile of this new publication called Michigan Runner Magazine. It had been founded by 2 school principals and 2 teachers who were running junkies and thought there should be a publication. And they had a big circulation. It had feature stories on top runners. It had advertising for coming races, results of past races. So I did a story on it. And a week later, the editor called and he said, that was really good. You know, we're all amateurs. We don't know what the hell we're doing. Would you like to be like the only professional writer we have? We can't afford to pay anything. We'll pay you a little bit. I said, sure. So suddenly I was a hockey writer. I wrote a monthly column for 34 years for them. A little while later, the Detroit News asked me to do a weekly column for them. I did that for 18 years. I started writing stories for Runner's World and Running Times, and I ended up getting paid, to my shock. And I found out that I traded one addiction for another. I traded cocaine for, endorphin buzz of running. But over the years, I ended up meeting a wife who was a marathon runner. I didn't meet a wife. I met a woman who became a girlfriend and then became a wife. We ended up getting I ended up getting paid to run and write about marathons in Rome, London, Key West, New York, Boston, Big Sur, San Francisco. I did the first Angkor Wat half marathon fundraiser for landmine victims in Cambodia in 2003. The next year I ran the Great Wall of China marathon. It was just astounding. None of it planned, none of it intentional. That's how I became a running writer. How did I become a business reporter? The answer is softball. And I think I've screwed up the story, but anyways. I cover Mike Ilitch's team for 3 years. I get Mike Ilitch in 1982 buys the Detroit Red Wings. The editor of the business section calls him frantically for a week. He won't return phone calls. Mike Ilitch doesn't like the media. The editor sees in the clips that I have written about Ilitch's softball team. So he calls and says, do you think Mike Ilitch will return your phone call? I said, sure. So I call Mike. 10 minutes later, he returns my call. The next day, I meet him at a bar around the corner from his first pizza joint in Garden City. And to his shock, I buy him a burger and a beer. And we do a long interview, and the story runs the following Monday. Editor calls me quite condescendingly and says, for a sports writer, that was a pretty good story. You want to do some more? I said, yeah. So I was a business reporter. How did I become a writer of true crime? I have the same answer, softball. The day after the Ilitch story runs, the editor gets a call from a guy named Sonny Van Arnhem. He owned a soccer team in town. He was always in the papers for he was going to form a cable TV syndicate. He was going to buy the Pistons. He was buying the Silver Dome. He owned an actual really good business. He was a broker, and he leased time on mainframe computers to companies that couldn't afford their own. And in the 70s and early 80s, that was a great business. About 82 or 83, there were this thing called PCs that were coming in, and his business was going to die real quick, real fast. But he called and he says, "You guys, that was a great Ilitch piece. You should do one on me." The editor says, "Hey, you should do this one on Sonny Van Arnhem." And I said, I was dating one of the people that works for him, and she hates him. He says everybody in town hates him, and he's sued everybody and getting sued by everybody. And I'm going to call her, and I called her, and she says, I know where all the bones are buried. I know who will talk to you on the record. I told him, this is not a Monday section. This is a story. This is a Sunday magazine story. I also knew he had a litigious reputation, so I recruited Laura Berman, who then was a rookie business reporter for the Detroit Free Press, later obviously to become a legend as a columnist, as just a superstar. I was a freelancer. I had no money to pay an attorney. She was a staff reporter. If her byline's on it and we get sued, Free Press attorney is going to pay for it or, cover it. She said, I'll do it if I get to write it. I said, I don't care. Let's just, we'll report it. Here's another example of how lucky I got. I'd never been to the Oakland County Courthouse or clerk's office in my life. I go walking in there, and who's standing there? Tom Walsh. Recently hired as a Free Press reporter. I'd met him once. He says, hey, what are you doing here? I said, oh, Laura and I are doing a thing on Sonny Van Arnhem. And he says, oh, that's great. He says, let me introduce you to the clerk. Well, it turns out in those days they had this incredible policy where if you were a credentialed reporter, they would just open the rooms for you where they stored all the legal files. You could just go in and pick what you wanted, go over to a computer and copy it all for free. Nobody even asked you what you were doing. I wasn't a credentialed reporter, but Tom acted like I was, said, hey, he's a Free Press reporter. Oh, hey, Sonny Van Arnhem. I'm looking for Sonny Van Arnhem stuff. They take me into the room where the V's are, and the woman warned me. She said, now the best file on him is his divorce file. It was huge. He lost, his wife cleaned him out. He's appealed it. The file went to the appeals court in Lansing. It's probably not back yet, but if it's back, it's under seal, and you can't have access to it. So I said, okay. So I go over there, and there's some, short stack. And then there's this one that's like this tall, wrapped in a thick rubber band, and I pull it down, and it's his divorce file. They'd misfiled it. They hadn't put it in the room where it's supposed to be under seal. I'm going to be 1 minute. So think about going last, So I go to the Xerox machine, and I spend the next 4 hours Xeroxing 1,200 pages of every thing in his history. Who he was suing him, who he hadn't paid, his lies about when he was getting a loan, how much he was worth, his lies to his wife when he was trying to say how little he was worth. We had everything, and Laura wrote the story. It ran with this wonderful cover by the great Dick Mayer. Sonny was dressed in circus ringmaster tail and top hat, walking across a tightrope, leaning at a 45-degree angle, about to fall, juggling a TV and a basketball. It ended his career in town. He literally moved to Florida, and if you Google Sonny Van Arnhem, you'll see 35 years of lawsuits, headlines, and deals gone bad in Florida. So none of that was planned. It was all completely fortuitous, and I have to take one more minute to say Cranes. I asked Cranes, a guy named Jeff Carub, who's managing editor at Cranes, briefly, went on to a great career at AP. I'd worked with him. When he was managing editor, I called and said, can I get some freelance work? He said, hey, come to a meeting tomorrow with Cindy Goodacre and Mary Kramer. I went to the meeting. Instead of a freelance project, Cindy said, we're not here to offer you freelance work. We want to offer you finance. You want the finance beat. I was smart enough to say yes. Cindy is a fairly small woman with a loud, infectious laugh, and she'd laugh all the time the first couple of days there, and I thought, she's going to be a piece of cake to work with. I've never been more wrong about a person in my life. This woman is the most exacting, demanding editor. She demands more sources, more facts, more context, more diligence, and she makes you the best you can be. And people like Kirk Pinho, when they get hired, I would warn them. And she would send stuff back to you with blue type, letting you know everything that you need to do or was wrong. I would tell Kirk, for the first 3 months you're here, you're going to drown in blue. It's going to start going away, and suddenly one day you'll realize there's no blue in this story. So Cindy, thank you. Thanks to Nancy Hannes, who bought a bunch of stuff for me at the News. Mike Lee, Amy Bragg, who are editors now. I'm still working there for some reason. And one last thing. Jeannie Bocci, can you stand up briefly? Just stand up real quick. Come on. See that woman there? She's one of my heroes, and I'll tell you why. In the 1960s, she was an athlete and a runner. The man there next to her was her boyfriend. He was one of the top runners in the Motor City Striders running club. She showed up at a race, and they said, we can't let you run. The Amateur Athletic Union, the AAU, had a rule that none of their credentialed member clubs could let women participate. So they would let her do the course, but they could not record her time. They could not record her name. And in 1971 or 2, when the Boston Marathon opened up the race to women, she was the first woman from Michigan to run the Boston Marathon.